With that, let me welcome all of you once again to this event. And as Dr. Gouri was saying, the new normal is to meet people on webinars. I suppose, uh, uh, I hope that this meeting would be an eventful one rather than just hello and well met, hello and goodbye. Now, 30 years ago, during the 1990s, a new paradigm emerged to fundamentally alter the power sector. It grew out of the wider Washington consensus on development and was spearheaded by the multilateral lending institutions. The new paradigm came on the heels of the investment crisis and growing dissatisfaction with state owned utilities. Yet, after almost 3 decades, the Indian power sector is still plagued with diverse issues ranging from payment delays by the already cash strapped discoms, bankruptcy of large generation utilities, regulatory and policy inconsistency, to lack of on the ground implementation. In recent times, the COVID 19 pandemic and the nationwide lockdown have also created a major setback for the already ailing power sector. We're also witnessing a swift global transition to low carbon and renewable energy sources in line with the Paris Accords commitment to fight climate change. Technological disruption is ushering new decentralized actors into the sector and reshaping business models. Hence, there is a growing consensus that the reform approaches based on the 1990s model alone will not be able to address the fiscal and operational challenges faced by the power sector. Power sector reforms must be shaped by the political and socio-economic context of individual states in the country. There is no one size fits all framework. Hence, the reform should be tailored according to the local needs and challenges. Furthermore, from the consumer's perspective, they hardly have any choice as they primarily consume electricity through the grid. Therefore, the sector needs bold and strong, business conducive, consumer friendly reforms. They have to be both business friendly and consumer friendly. There has to be a win win situation. At the same time, consumers also need to understand and support or oppose such reforms in a judicious manner. However, to facilitate the same, they need a basic understanding of their rights and the institutional knowledge of the sector for taking up the issues. And what I would like to add to rights and responsibilities as well. Cuts International has been working towards this end over the last 3 decades. Our efforts have been towards building capacities of electricity consumers in order to facilitate their participation in the regulatory processes and also influence key policy decisions. We have also been extensively working in the areas of promoting green energy, rooftop solar, electric vehicles, etc. It is imperative to mention here that these endeavors would not have been successful without the consistent support for organizations such as Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, represented here by Anshu Bharadwaj, for which we are immensely grateful. With this, I would like to call upon Mr. Anshu Bharadwaj, the CEO of Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation, to deliver his opening remarks. Over to you, Anshu.
Thank you, Mr. Mehta. Thank you very much for the kind invite. It's a pleasure to be part of this meeting today. And I am really delighted to join CUTS International as well as Bask Research Foundation in this today's webinar. As you know, I recently joined in September in Shakti, and I got to know the excellent work being done by CUTS over the years, as you rightly mentioned. And Shakti is very happy to be partnering with you. I also gratefully acknowledge the presence of Shri Anshuman Gotwal, the ED of Bask Research Foundation, and Arvind sir, my senior colleague in the civil service. So greetings to all of you. Pradeep, you have very beautifully set the context. So I'll just add a little bit more to that. We have been tracking the distribution sector for quite a while. Um, and distribution sector has been the focus of a lot of things. So if I were to go back to late 1990s, when the APDRP was launched by the government of India, that time the focus of APDRP was technical reforms and commercial, reducing commercial losses. So how can we improve the T&D efficiency? How can we reduce the technical losses and theft of power? That was the main focus of APDRP. We came to our APDRP, which was in early 2000s, the first decade of that. And again, the same focus continued. That is, how can we improve the technical efficiency of distribution sector? Now we are into a completely new territory where we find that distribution companies, the drivers are not just the reduction of losses, but also enabling of clean energy technologies. And discoms are at the crux of adoption of clean technologies. We are talking about electric mobility, deployment of electric vehicles, which require a network of charging stations in discoms. We are talking about solar rooftop photovoltaics and other distributed energy sources in urban and rural areas. We are talking about solar-based irrigation systems. States like Karnataka and Maharashtra have done well in those technologies. We are talking about smart metering and energy efficient appliances. So it's a new paradigm for the distribution companies where they are enablers of clean energy technologies. So it is not just what we used to talk about in 1990s and 2000s. It's a new territory for our discom companies, and therefore we need to rework, make them more important utilities, more efficient operationally becomes more and more important. One thing which emerges from this is the role of consumer, because whatever I just said, whether it is electric mobility, whether it is installation of distributed energy sources, smart metering, adoption of appliances, in everything, consumer is a very important constituent and a key player in the entire utility game. And thus, the focus on consumer becomes even more important. You mentioned earlier that we had a top-down model of generation, transmission, distribution. In the evolving paradigm, consumer involvement awareness becomes an integral part of success. And thus, the work which you have done in this report needs to be complemented, because you have brought the consumer into focus. The work too in Rajasthan, where we worked in 4 districts to establish 6 consumer assistance cells in the phase 1, and in the phase 2 to expand beyond that to look at overall performance of distribution sector. Keeping consumers in focus, I think, is very important and needs to be complemented. I think the learnings which we draw from this particular project will have immense for other states and other discoms as well. Shakti is also hosting, as you are aware, a distribution utilities forum where utilities periodically come together to share their experiences. And we would very much like if this work is showcased there so that other discoms get to know and get to learn from the work done by in Rajasthan. So with those introductory remarks, I will stop. And I again congratulate the teams of Cuts International and Bask in this very nice piece of work. Shakti is very happy to be associated. And I thank my colleagues in Shakti, Richa and Vivek, who have been closely involved in this work. Thank you, sir. Back to you.
Thank you, Anshu. Thank you for an excellent introduction to this. And we are so happy that you are happy. That is the most important thing in this kind of relationship as to whether we've been able to deliver the goods as we were required to do. That has been a reputation for long, if I may use my own sort of mouthpiece to say so. We do make clear efforts to ensure that there is clear outcomes and not just outputs of whatever we do. Now, electricity sector is a difficult sector, as per reasons all of us have known and speak about, and more we're going to speak about. but we hope that things will move. Secondly, I think the important facet is what we've been doing for the last 36 years is to raise the consumer voice in policy making. That we have to have the demand side in order to push. And every other day nowadays, fortunately, we keep on getting demands, requests from others to do a consumer movement on any of these issues which are coming up lately. With that, may I now request Anshuman Gotwal, Executive Director of Bask Research Foundation, for his presentation, please.
Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you. I hope I'm audible to everyone.
Yes, to me you are.
Okay, cool. So I'll just share the presentation. Give me a second, please. Uh, is the presentation visible to everyone? Visible to everyone?
Yes.
Okay. So I'll just stating the focus of consumer, which is talked about a lot, but still, if we see the presence of that stakeholder, whether it is engagement in terms of regulatory platforms or even in terms of its participation in various they hold. Here I would just like to bring out some key insights of this project that we just. So this project was supported by Shakti Foundation. Objective was to build capacity of electricity consumers and creating awareness for improvement in standard of performance. It also focused on mapping grassroots experience in terms of uh, how are and what are the kind of services that are being provided by the DISCOM, and also experiencing the institutional mechanism that are there for grievance redressal and for evidence collection, for getting information through DISCOMs and others and so on. A focus was also on creation of a network of individuals who can continuously and actively engage in the sector, so as to ensure transparency and accountability. So as Anshu rightly said that 6 consumer assistance cells were established, whose primary task was to um, provide support in grievance with discoms, but they were also instrumental in mapping consumer experience at grassroots levels through surveys, institutional mechanism, and evidence collection and RTIs. So this is the broad work that was done under this project. Moving further, you can see the status of consumer awareness. Now, the stats that you're seeing on screen right now is basically result of a survey that was conducted in 4 districts, that Bikaner, Savai Madhopur, and Chittorgarh and Jodhpur at the start of the project. And you can see that when it comes to awareness, there is no awareness or very little awareness about the Office of Electricity Ombudsman, the grievance redressal forums, the standards of performance, and a very minuscule 3% of the surveyed consumers knew about the regulatory commission. So we can see that the consumer awareness is very, very low. And if we gauge the focus of distribution companies or the regulatory commission on consumer awareness, the expenditure which has been allocated to distribution companies by regulatory commission, that for past 3-4 years, regulatory commission has been allocating 0.5 CR to distribution companies to spend on consumer education and awareness, but this amount is hardly being utilized. In one of the responses that we received just from Ajmer Discom, we were shocked to see that they had spent only 26,000 on consumer education and awareness. So similar is the case for Jaipur Discom as well, where they claim to spend a very high amount on consumer education and awareness, but most of that money is going into app development or other activities which is not directly linked to consumer awareness. So moving on, I'll just give you a glimpse of the analysis of types of complaints that we have received in these 6 cells. So if you can see here, these are these 6 bars for each cells, and These different colors represent the kind of complaint that were presented at these cells. So it is quite evident which is the most prominent complaint among consumers basically. Besides billing being a monetary issue, billing is also related to many potential uh, inefficiencies of DISCOM. The meter can be defective, the meter reading cannot, meter reading is not taken, and sometimes the bill is not uh, given to consumer in timely manner. So there are many, this billing issue is multifold, and that is why this is the most prominent issue among the complaints received at these cells. 40 of these complaints were escalated to grievance redressal forums, and few of them were also escalated to the Ombudsman Office for experience. Um, we can see here that billing here is a very multifold problem. So I'll just would like to mention a instance, a located in Western Rajasthan in Bikaner. He was a consumer who was a farmer in Bikaner, and the farmer was he was a very low income farmer basically. So what in this particular case, the farmer got his meter replaced, but the DISCOM continued billing him on the erstwhile meter readings. So the DISCOM, every 6-7 months later, the DISCOM kept on charging the farmer with audit charges, and this kept on happening for more than 2.5 years. And when we escalated this complaint to ombudsman of the electricity ombuds after going through the grievance redressal forum, at all penalized for this, and there was no compensation made to the consumer for this harassment that he had to go through. And in addition to this, the rules of resolution, right, they can do retrospective billing for more than 2 years as well. So if the consumer is not compensated or the problem that he encounters during the procedure, then it's a big letdown for the consumer. Also, the just giving an anecdotal example of what the ombudsman say, that there is an provision in standards of performance where the consumer can get some compensation, but again he will have to go through this loop of filing SOP application and everything, and the amount that he will get out of incorrect billing would be a meager 100% of that instance. So that is a very demotivating thing for the consumers. We also conducted feeder surveys in these four under these four consumer assistance cells, just sharing some insights into the some insights of the metering infrastructure from the feeder survey. We can see that the accessibility of meter, that the meter, where the meter lies in the consumer's premises, it's quite high. In there's a significant number of meters which are difficult to access or inaccessible. Similarly, in terms of readability of meter as well, there are quite a few number of meters which are either unreadable or difficult to read. So it becomes difficult for even for DISCOMs to come up with accurate billing in under such conditions. We can see the status of defective meters as well. Here the status of defective meter as per bill is shown in blue, whereas the actual status of defective meter in inspection was quite high. Similarly, the meters were not calibrated. A significant portion of meters were not calibrated for more than 5 years, which is the standard CA norm given by CA norm. So these are some of the issues which are still there at the grassroots level. And when we talk of smart meters and so many things, one wonders what will happen to them when if such things keep on continuing. These are just some of the pictures that we got during this surveys. We can see there's a dust laden meter. There are meters with improper termination of cables, and there's a meter which is just waiting to catch fire basically. as I said, that we also experience the institutional mechanisms for grievance redressal, that is these grievance redressal forums and the electricity ombudsman. Here, one thing is important, that the regulations in Rajasthan are quite unique. They don't provide for centralized 3-4 or 2-3 grievance redressal forum, but they have a grievance redressal forum each subdivision, division, circle, and at corporate level. So I remember when I was the existence of these forums so becomes equally difficult. I remember when we went to Savai Madhupur, even the DISCOM officials were not aware of such forums existing. Division and divisional forums are found to be non-functional, and even as I said, the staff doesn't know about it. And most of the components, as I said, we escalated some 40 plus complaints to these forums. 90% of on 90% of the complaints, we didn't get any response. Ignored by the primarily part of these grievance redressal forums. These grievance redressal forums, by virtue of the regulatory framework, are basically dominated by stating resolution of cases on the basis of the merit of the case, but they focus more on getting the case settled. Talking about the experience at electricity ombudsman, um, the staff strength at electricity ombudsman is 2 person. One is the electricity ombudsman himself, and there is a deputy director. So we can also see that it is highly incapacitated to take the volume of complaints that are present in Rajasthan. It is centrally located, as we know, it is Jaipur, and Rajasthan being the largest state in the country, it is definitely difficult for the consumers all around to go there. The Ombudsman Office again doesn't penalizes DISCOM for its faults and problems, and provides no compensation to consumers for any harassment. And in addition to that, the rules and manner for that, it ends up favoring DISCOM in many ways. Going further, this is a good governance framework that we have developed for the institutions of grievance redressal forum and ombudsman, where evaluation of 5 states is done on the basis of 5 areas that include autonomy, enforcement, accountability, accessibility, and inclusivity. Each of these areas are divided into further parameters, like autonomy is divided into structural dependence, competency of forum, and independence of forum. And these are further divided into sub-parameters, which are given a weightage and proportion. And these are compared with the standard ideal regulation based on the F4 regulation and our experiential learning from this project. So on the basis of this, basically this is a unique framework in which by which the qualitative aspect of these regulations have been quantified to show that among all these states where Rajasthan lies. So if we see in terms of autonomy of GRF, Rajasthan lies quite low. And similarly, in most of these uh, areas like enforcement, accountability, inclusivity, and accessibility, Rajasthan lies and performs quite poorly. So these would be published shortly and would be available in public domain for more information. Thank you.
Thank you, Anshuman.
Just I would like to add one few more things, Pradeep. Just as a
we are running out of time.
Yeah, just 2 sentences on what we actually achieved is one is that we have actually forged an active and vibrant network of consumer advocates and civil services organizations who actively seek out information, disseminate information among itself, and also keeps on planning to participate in this sector. And we have also, through training programs and workshops, laid down the importance of documenting the reality of ground, so that it goes to a proper authority in a proper manner. The DISCOM support in this manner has been exemplary. The DISCOM resources have been part of our training programs, and the DISCOM has also come together for joint programs and collaborative programs for consumer initiatives with us. So these are some of the good things that have been eventually part of this project. Thank
Thank
you.
you very much. But what better to heed your findings and listen to is our next speaker, the keynote speaker, Dr. Arvind Mayaram. He's economic advisor to the Chief Minister and Vice Chairman of the CM's Rajasthan Economic Transformation Advisory Council. Over to you, Arvind.
Okay, thank you, Pradeep. I think we have had a very stimulating and informative opening statements and also the presentation. And as we are running out of time, I will keep myself brief. As Pradeep mentioned right in the beginning, the power sector is very complex. And the complexity in the power sector increases exponentially when we start looking at distribution. The reason is one, we have a baggage of the past. We have developed systems over last 60, 70 years where the power cost of power and the price of power have diverged and continue to diverge significantly. Now, the cost of distribution increases for several reasons, including poor infrastructure, poor management to a great extent, and also because the cost of power to the consumer has also become a political issue. We have seen state after state after state going in just before the elections, promising free power, and then being saddled with that promise for a very long period of time. And therefore, what happens is when you get power which is not commensurate with the cost, the price for power which is not commensurate with the cost, the discoms begin to lose money and don't have enough money to improve upon the systems and therefore improve the services. So we have entered into a kind of a vicious cycle where there is a downward spiral. We continue to provide cheap power or free power for political reasons, but also for another reason because our services are poor or our quality of power is asymmetrical. And therefore, people also don't wish to pay more. And because we are not being able to recover the cost, therefore, we are running into the issue of not being able to provide enough power. So when we talk of grievance, actually, the grievances which have been brought out here, I can understand they're important. But I think primarily the first and biggest grievance is adequate power and quality power. Because if you don't have adequate power and quality power, then your complaint about whether the transformer is working properly or not working properly, if the transformer is not charged, whether the transformer is functioning or not functioning, then becomes irrelevant. So I think it is very important to work on several fronts, and from the point of view of the consumer, it is important to to be able to empower the consumer through civil society organizations. And I think cuts has done some very pioneering work, very quality work, and I must commend Pradeep and his team for having been in this field for the last 20, 30 years when people just did not even talk about consumer rights or consumer participation. But what we need is one, enunciating, as has been brought out in the presentation also, the grievances of the consumers and their redress of the grievance. But we need to do the reverse also, which is consumer education, and to be able to convince the consumers that unless they understand the economics of power, they will never be able to get either proper grievance redress or adequate and quality power supply to themselves. What we have been able to now achieve, luckily, and we can achieve more, is because of the induction of new technologies, and also because we are also moving away from the what was known as dirty power, which was thermal power, which has been a bane for environment, towards clean energy. Rajasthan has been in the forefront of it. We have seen the commitment of the government of Rajasthan to move towards clean energy. Our solar power and wind power installations are growing every year exponentially, but also in terms of the other measures that the state government has taken. For instance, introduction of smart meters. We have close to 280,000 smart meters already installed just in Jaipur and Tonk. And also private sector has been brought in, which improves overall infrastructure, the power leakages or thefts, and therefore when more power gets metered, then the cost of power also decreases for the consumer in the same ratio. So these are some of the improvements we are seeing already in districts like Ajmer, Bikaner, Bharatpur, and Kota, and the adjoining districts in these regions. But there is a huge work which we still need to do, and I think we will need to look at several aspects of power distribution in this. One is to restore the financial health of the discoms. I think we have to be mindful of the fact that unless we improve the health of the discoms, we are going to run into the other problem, which has an overhang on the fiscal health of the state itself. We saw, for instance, the earlier effort where it was felt that if the discom's debt is transferred to the state government, in my mind, it was a very ill-conceived scheme of the government of India, where discom's debt was transferred to the state government. The state government in Rajasthan took close to 80,000 crores of the debt of the discoms on its books, and its fiscal deficit shot up. It now has no headroom to borrow for other developmental activities, and this has had a great impact on the state's developmental processes. So we cannot run discoms purely by subsidies. We need to move towards better realization of revenues. But for better realization of revenues, it is important that discoms become more transparent in their pricing. The consumer is actually able to see why they are paying the price that they are paying. Is it on account of the inefficiencies of the system or the management, or is it the real price that they have to pay because of the cost of the inputs which keep going up every year? So there has to be a transparency, there has to be a dialogue between the consumer and the discoms. And I think what we need to do is to be able to create that the bridge of communication, two-way communication between the discoms and the consumer. And I think organizations like whether it is CUTS or other civil society organizations, they will have to play a much more active and important role. And I am quite convinced that the discoms must engage more meaningfully with the civil society organizations, so that they can help these discoms in creating that bridge of two-way communication, which will then bring back the distribution sector to health. I will stop here, but I commend the work that has been done, and I would look forward to the report, and we will certainly give it a very serious consideration to see that large number of those recommendations, as many of those recommendations as are feasible at the moment, are implemented as soon as possible. Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to speak with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Arvind. The smallest issue which can be resolved are the systemic problems which are existing and not about the price. Grievance redressal, accountability, responsiveness. If these are a few things which could be done, consumers would gain much more confidence and trust in the
The
system.
problem, I think, Pradeep, is what we don't realize. Sometimes responsiveness is sluggish because of lack of resources.
Right.
I'll give you an example. Transformer gets burnt. It takes, say, 30 days for the transformer to change. The consumers are completely complaining all the time. But the reason is that the financial situation of the discom is such that they are not able to procure immediately or keep a big inventory to be able to change that. So I'm saying
No,
that,
no, fair enough. Let them
so
say that.
therefore, no,
Let them level with the consumer that,
no.
look,
So this is where I
yeah,
said we
yeah,
need to create a bridge of two-way communication,
exactly. Yeah. ये
and
हमारे पास अभी
you have
साधनों
to
की
play
कमी
an
है.
important role in that.
जी, जी. Thank you very much. With that, may I now thank Arvind, Anshu, Anshuman for their opening statements and remarks and interesting debate. Now I hand over the proceedings to my friend and colleague Simran Grover, the Chief Executive Officer of Bask Research Foundation, with whom we have jointly implemented this and many other projects. Simran, over to you.
Thank you so much, Pradeep. We're running 5 minutes, 7 minutes behind. I'll quickly like to invite our panelists for today. We have Dr. Geeta Gouri, who's former member of APRC and Competition Commission of India. Ma'am, do we have you with us? You're not audible. Host, if you can just unmute her.
Right. Am I audible now?
Yes, perfect. We also have with us Dr. Rahul Tongia from Center for Economic and Social Progress. Rahul?
Hi, yes, Center for Social and Economic Progress.
Sorry, apologies, Center for Social and Economic
We
Progress.
were formerly known as Brookings India.
Welcome, Rahul, welcome. Next, we have with us Dr. G. Ganesh Das from Tata Power.
Hello, good afternoon. Good afternoon, all.
Welcome, sir, welcome. And lastly, we have Dr. Anoop Singh from IIT Kanpur and Center for Energy Regulations.
Hi, yeah.
Welcome, sir. A few house rules. For the audience, questions are very welcome. Please post them in the chat and we'll try to take them up as much as we can at the end of the session. To the panelists, I, of course, invite you to be as candid as possible. You are free to evoke, provoke, and call for action. I'll just set the context. I'll three takeaways from Anshuman's presentation. And I'll request the panelists to be conscious of these three takeaways. One, consumer awareness largely in India, especially in Rajasthan, in remote areas, is extremely dismal. So where does the spate of reforms happening, consumer rules, standards of performance, and everything, all those complicated things happening, where does this leave us? Second, the system inefficiency, which leaves consumers extremely vulnerable. So I want the panelists to be very conscious of the vulnerability of the consumers. And lastly, the inability of the DISCOM to perform very core basic functions like billing and metering, right? With this, I think Mr. Mayaram, Pradeep articulated very well that power sector has been, a stage for utter confusion. The acts of politics, technology, and governance have unfolded with little ownership and coherence. Public distribution companies, of course, have emerged as a natural antagonist hated by the consumers as well as the private sector, and most recently, even by the government to a large extent. But I think we can all agree that this is not a usual villain. It neither has the money nor the power. Although its existence is very central for the drama to continue, right? There's another fundamental question I think we'll try to achieve some clarity around through the panelists. And the question is, what's the understanding of electricity? Is it a commodity or is it an essential public service, right? With this, I think I would like
Yes.
with maybe Dr. Das, if we can begin with you.
Have I been asked to speak?
Ma'am, you can go ahead. I invited Dr. Das, but you
I
can
have
definitely go
this
ahead.
internet which behaves very badly when I want to speak. So, thank you so much. I'd first like to thank Bask Foundation and CUTS for having taken up a very important subject. And I would also like to state my framework is within a very important concept. That is, while there has been a lot of decentralization of energy generation, with the solar and the wind and the small things, and of course they're not fully completed in India, there's been an attempt for centralization of governance. The 2020 Act brings this question of centralization, and let's not forget that electricity is a concurrent subject. And therefore, there's always the arguments that will come up between the states and the center and how you will control it. But since this very good study that has been done, and I had a chance to have a look at it on the question of consumer awareness, and Simran, I would like to take up what happened in Andhra Pradesh, where we took this consumer as very central to the whole process of reforms, starting with it in 1998, 99 itself, which means there's a diversity. When I read the report and what was presented on Rajasthan, I must say I was a little surprised. Because the consumer in Andhra, when they are backed beautifully, they're highly political. You have the farmer groups which would come and disrupt all public meetings because they insisted on certain tariffs. And we also had other groups, which means that any group that has a political backing can become a lobby. Very obvious, very, very obvious. And Mayaram had put it so beautifully. Arvind had covered everything so beautifully that I think what one would like to do is that your statements would require a little bit of modification. And I find that some of the southern states, when I looked at Maharashtra and Karnataka, have been very different from Rajasthan. Now, having stated that, and the question that we also have group captives, that's what Andhra started with, the question of group captives. We have to be able to define the consumer. The consumer in the Electricity Act is one who gets electricity. It's not the consumer you understand in terms of a political economy as a class group. So there's a definition. Now, what is important, and this is where I want to talk about for being part of the ERC, is the most important thing, as has been pointed by all, is to have consumer forums, to involve consumers into the entire process of setting of tariffs. And we did this in Andhra, and we had the consumer redressal forums for everyone. And there was also the ombudsman. Now, I checked out with my ombudsman just the other day, and they said they're still doing very well. Okay. Can I just finish, and then you can ask me the question? I'll finish very quickly. Now, for this consumer redressal forum, what is it that needs to be done and what is required? I have noted some of the things now. Is that, it helps when you bring the order in Telugu. We brought out all the orders in Telugu. We had the discussions in Telugu, and we got the DISCOMs responsible for it. But you see, the DISCOMs are also playing the game. And I'm a little worried with the centralization. And the reason why I brought it up is if the electricity regulatory commissions are selected by the central government, how much do the states have a say? Against the counter that the states make the regulatory commissions lose their independence. So the crux of it is who is independent and how to be independent. I think this becomes very important, and we are now moving towards markets, especially with the electricity contract authority being thought of, and the whole setup becomes extremely different. And in Andhra, we did define the performance, we tried to get the consumers, but that doesn't mean to say the game ends there. It has to be a continuous process. And I'm so glad it was taken up. I thought I'll share this with the others because they may not know of some of the southern experiences. Perhaps Anoop might be familiar. Let me stop here because we're really running short of time.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. I think you answered some of the questions I wanted to take up in later part of the session, but thank you so much for your inputs. Dr. Das, very quickly, 30 to 40 seconds. As from a governance perspective and regulation perspective, what's your take on electricity? Should it be treated as a commodity or an essential public service?
Thank you, Tanu. In fact, earlier I was not able to unmute myself. I'm sorry for that. So just wanted to tell you that, see, people buy electricity. Actually, they are not buying electricity. Electricity is not of any use to them. What they are buying is what is that subsequently they are able to do with that electricity. Essentially, for instance, you are using it for an appliance, you are using it to run the industry, and different applications are there. So the choice here is, do you want to stop where you are giving electricity to a consumer under the Electricity Act and all those regulations, and then decide that, whatever is the hardship consumer subsequently, has or comes into play, then you just close your eyes to that. In the research, I was just wondering, when you are talking about the grievance, various graphs of the grievance responses, have you correlated all this to the performance of the utility and this multiple area? Of course, you had talked about load shedding and you had talked about other things also. But the point here is, when you are talking about the customer will operate at different level of maturity. For instance, if I may give an example of Delhi, when we took over, when the losses were almost at 53%, now which is at around 5.84% now, the consumer behavior has changed. The consumer participation, consumer commitment, consumer empowerment, everything comes with the maturity of the utility. So what I would say, just to very simply answer, when you are talking about the governance, and how far you want to participation rather than governance. How do you really empower the customer? How do you really get the consumer to participate along with you? I think I stop here by making that statement. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Rahul, if you can go next, please.
So just if I could answer this question that you asked, I think it's a false equivalence to choose between a commodity or a public good. It's actually should be viewed as a public utility, which is its own very specific class of goods and services, which has certain obligations of service, but it also has regulatory obligations as well. And then you can choose how much can you pay. Maybe you use a lens of affordability or progressiveness. And the problem is, look at many other things like mobile phones. We pay for it. Dish TV, satellite TV. People do pay for it, even the poorer segments of society. So it's not as if electricity needs to be thought of as something so unique. Last, on this lens, I'm a strong believer in a concept of lifeline. So for those who can't afford it, we should make it extremely affordable, if not close to free. But the quantum required for that isn't the quantums that are being consumed today. Delhi is the most egregious example of this, where, the richest state in India, pretty much up to 400 kilowatt hours per month for residential consumers, you're subsidizing it heavily. So this is a reset we need in this conversation.
Thank you. Very well articulated, Rahul. Thank you so much. We'll definitely come back to it. Dr. Anoop, any additional thoughts?
Couple of thoughts. I think, as Rahul mentioned, that you should view it really as a public utility rather than public good. Well, the telecom services has really transformed from being a public good to public utility to now so-called a commodity. Currently, everybody views it like a commodity. Everybody pays for it, and nobody has any complaints against it. And of course, it's because it's driven primarily from the private sector. You have less number of complaints because their revenues are dependent on it. While in the electricity sector, of course, the way we have packaged the commodity, so-called, or the public utility, it has become I'll say not even a public good, it has become a political good as such. So the consumers tend to always feel it seems to be my right to have electricity and my right to have a good quality electricity. But I'll put one more context that we are not alone to think about telecom or electricity as essential services. For example, Sweden have come up with its own target that by 2020, I don't know whether they have been able to achieve now, they wanted to cover 95% of their population by broadband, up to about, I think, 100 bits per second. This was their objective. It's an announced objective, and that is for an individual, for a citizen, he will treat it like as if it's like an essential service which the government is aiming to provide. So it really depends on from which angle we look at it. But Simran, you also brought about one very interesting aspects about the governance in the sector itself, right?
Right.
Is something. This is an aspect actually we have been trying to look into it, and we have a paper out of this also now in energy policy. And the key context of power sector reform in the Indian context has been that we wanted to so-called change the governance structure at the sector level, right? At the sector level. So when we talked about unbundling, it was at the sector level. We wanted to have competition at the sector level. We never really paid attention to the governance at the DISCOM level. This is where we have really missed the bus. Because of being a publicly owned entity, well, it's the relationship between the political class and whether the regulators and even the employees, it still remains more or less the same as it used to be earlier. And one final point, that when we introduced the process of reform in the country, we did a very big mistake. And we can compare it with some of the developed societies. We did not involve consumers and the employees into any discussion about what does the reform mean, how are we going to implement it, what is in it for you. When the UK government actually started thinking about reforms in the power sector, all the consumers used to be sent something like a monthly newsletter telling them then what's happening with the state, what's the current state of affair of the reform in the sector. Here, we never wanted the confidence of the consumers, neither we wanted really employees to be on board. So once employees are not on board, they are also least bothered about what you people, quote unquote, you people keep on deciding about the reform process in the sector.
Thank you, Anoop, for those points, very interesting points. Let me connect that to Dr. Ganesh from Tata Power. So you raised a very interesting point on consumer maturity. So my question to you is, as a distribution company, how central is consumer satisfaction to your business goals, and how do you achieve the integration between the two?
So, whatever you say, end of the day, the consumer has a very big role to play. And I'm not very sure, the point which made on Anoop with respect to the participation or the involvement of customer, how far that is applicable now, because you find today there are forums in which the consumer is an important stakeholder. In the regulator, DRC doesn't do anything, or any regulator doesn't do anything. There is a method of taking consumer opinion, and if you look at the privatization of Delhi, it was essentially a tripartite agreement between the employee unions and the private sector of the company, and then the government. So there is a way and a process of doing it, and some of the things which government does is quite balanced. So having said that, if you look at from the perspective of what consumer is really looked at from the present role of the consumer, it is extremely critical, because if you typically look at the classification of the customer, now what we are in a situation where there is no differentiation you can do or provide to any of the customers. It is all defined in the regulation, how you are going to treat a domestic customer, or you are going to treat a industrial customer, or somebody, a commercial customer. Somebody pays you more, you are not going to give a special treatment. That it is all defined by the regulation. So what is happening is, you are talking about a consumer centricity. At the same time, you are not allowing differentiation to serve the customer in a different way. Of course, you can do it by different mechanism of value creation, etc., which we do, which is really outside the gamut of the regulation. But the point is, customer focus is there. You don't do anything without the customer, and the customer feedback, especially for our kind of a regulatory framework, is extremely important, because you are constantly, you go to the regulator, and every time the ARR is put up to the regulator, there is a discussion. The tariff is a very big discussion point. And in fact, end of the day, today, what happens is the tariff is not affected. So on one side, we are talking about putting consumer in the focus, which of course, as I mentioned, organization like us always have that in mind. But at the same time, the tariff, which is going to really determine the quality of the service and the balance between the level of the service and the options you can provide to a customer, is actually going to be determined by a government, which is largely looking at not perhaps the market forces, but looking at that it is slightly skewed. The decision is slightly skewed on looking at different multiple dimensions of political and social economic situation. So consumer centricity is extremely important. And if you look at the journey, whatever we have concluded in terms of implementation of technology or anything, largely everything was driven through a customer centric outcome, and it is very evident for whatever we have done. Thank you.
Right. Since you mentioned technology, Mr. Das, let's Rajasthan, who are trying to make sense of a lot of these interventions, including ourselves. Perhaps some of us are as confused as our electricity consumers. Smart meters, for example, are being positioned as the magic wand, which are going to solve a lot of problems. Anshu mentioned before, we have various reform programs, various versions of IPDS. Recently, we have Uday, but it seems you all go into cycles, right? But specifically talking about smart meters, I mean, you have Tata Power DDL has been one of the pioneers on early leaders in implementation of smart meter and AMI. If you can, discuss your experience, your strategy on diving into this new technology, some of the challenges you faced, and some of the possible pitfalls that public distribution companies need to prepare for, given the scale of intervention now.
So what we did is I just moved a little bit back, and somewhere about 2003, 2004, we realized that our majority of the pilferage of electricity and the revenue leakage was happening in the commercial and industrial sector. So we immediately went for AMR, that is automatic meter reader, and then we realized that there is no single platform wherein you can aggregate all the information of the advanced metering infrastructure. So we created our own meter data management system. And then we took the protocol from different meter manufacturer and started getting the information. So we started somewhere doing the meter reading remotely, and which helped us to reduce the losses to a great extent. Then we subsequently moved to what we call as the smart meter or the advanced metering infrastructure. When we started operating on the advanced metering infrastructure, it was much ahead of the standards which was coming in from the BIS. So we had to look at different technologies. So what we did is we explored multiple technologies like RF. In RF, we did RF mesh, point-to-point integration, point-to-multi-point communication. Then we looked at low voltage PLC. Then we looked at the cellular combinations. We did all those things. And then there was a thought that when you are implementing smart meters, is it only supposed to do only meter reading, or can it be extended for multiple applications? Then we realized that if we create an RF mesh, there is a possibility to add more intelligent devices into your network. And then the more devices, you will make the RF mesh more robust. And this will also help us to share the cost of the RF mesh. And one case in point is, once you are, it is your own private network. So you are having a control of the cyber security. And also, if you see some of the cases we had, wherein if there is a disruption of services, you are metering and your billing goes for a 6. So this is something which is totally secured and we control it. So what we have done is, we have looked at from the security standpoint, from the convenience standpoint, from the cost standpoint, and the maturity of the utility. That is an important point, because why we could do all those things is because our utility, we had learned as we grew. So it was easy for us to adopt a technology, and we learn as we are implementing technology. So making you the point, if you look at a typical public utility, they have got, I wouldn't hesitate to make a statement that they would have the same kind of engineers as we would have in our private utility. But the question is, what kind of a exposure they would have time to time. And of course, there are a lot of initiative coming from the government to give that exposure. Now things are a little different. So that will actually make the maturity of the utility will decide what kind of technology, what kind of a handholding of the technology deployment it is required to take it forward. So just to make it very crisp, the public utility also can actually do the way the private utility, like somebody like us, is doing. But it's a question of having a different strategy and possibly having a larger kind of a forceful and probably a more kind of a detailed roadmap, because it is much vast than what we are talking about here. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me articulate next questions, Rahul, and then maybe you can come in. Mr. Das, I think one of my key takeaway from you will be that there has been an evolution of understanding of the technology. There has been experimentation. There has been a learning curve. From a Rajasthan perspective, at least, I can say that it's missing, and the technology is being imported and directly deployed on the ground, right? Which shoots up a lot of concerns, especially when basic metering is not working on the ground. It also brings, as you mentioned, concerns around data privacy, cybersecurity, and data monetization, right? So with that, my question to Anoop, and maybe Rahul, you can also jump in, is what regulatory oversight would you recommend to ensure smooth transition to AMI and to avoid the typical pitfalls with new technology upgradation, innovation that we have faced in India? Rahul, very quickly, if you can pitch in, and then over to Dr. Anoop.
Well, instead of just saying what regulatory, it's an ecosystem. You need an alignment of the regulatory side, consumer side, all of the above. Let me step back to the point I wanted to make. Smart meters have typically been viewed on a revenue lens like AT&C loss reduction. And that's an insufficient lens. We have to look for tomorrow's needs as opposed to yesterday's problems only. The tomorrow's needs are, as Anshu mentioned and others mentioned, sustainability, consumer empowerment, making them prosumers. We want to rethink the relationship with the consumer. And the problem is most lenses today look for um, sticks. We don't have enough carrots for the consumer. So I think the first thing that's needed, this relates to consumer education, but also what's in it for me. And I have the same complaint about prepaid meters. Why would a consumer go for a prepaid meter unless there's something in it for them? And I can talk about the problems with prepaid separately if you want. But to make smart meters work, you need three things from a consumer perspective. First, it's got to be plug and play. It's got to be simple. It's got to work not just at a metering level, but if you start to think of smart appliances, whatever the heck that means, then it has to be easy. It should not be Samsung phone needed to control a Samsung AC. Second, the consumer needs to retain control. Let's say you have some sort of control signals for demand response or something else. The utility can incentivize, but it shouldn't take over the rights of the consumer. No one wants to give up. If I want to take a warm bath early in the morning, Discom has no right to say, sorry, abhi thoda bijli kam hai. It's my choice how to do that or not. Last, there has to be an incentive. This relates to the time of day sort of issue, that maybe once we rethink not just of metering and billing, but tie it towards the regulatory side. So this is one of the things the regulator needs to do, is get the incentives so that the grid conditions, what the consumers are charged for that, and what their incentives to participate and change behaviors are aligned. So it's not that I just want to save energy. I need to save energy at the right time, the right place. And that's when the consumer and the Discom align. Because if your paying customers cut down their usage, that doesn't help the Discom in today's sort of a world.
Sorry, some technical issue. Thank you, Rahul. I think what I'm hearing from you is there's a need for consumer-centric transformation. Dr. Anoop, if you want to come in.
Can I make a point before you give it to Anoop? Because I wanted to refer to what Rahul was saying. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Please go ahead.
See, when you are talking in terms of the regulatory commissions and the design of tariffs, the design of tariffs for consumers are taking into account if you do a proper cost to serve model. And that very few electricity sectors, Discoms do it. The reason why I'm saying it is only in Andhra that's been done. And Rahul, while you're right, you have to incentivize it also. Finally, what has been happening is that this is what goes to the government. And that's why I kept saying what is important is the independence of the electricity regulator to decide how you define your consumers, which are the groups you look at it, which is the load factor, how do you load it on? It's not as if people don't know about it. I just find that many of the northern states don't seem to have done it. And I'm really surprised by all of you in your comments that you don't know what's happening in the southern states. It's really sad. And this is something, Simran, you have to note it. You can't give just Rajasthan example or UP example or Delhi example. They're not ERCs which have functioned well. Please remember that.
Agreed, ma'am.
Okay, then since I made my point and you want to go on about ERCs and this thing, I think I will
strongly noted. Strongly noted.
Yes. Your northern ERCs and your problems, which none of you have understood for the last 20 years, which I've been continuously talking about, which I have been writing about, But it seems to be so Delhi-centric. And DRC is such a pampered thing. We did things which no one else could do. So that's fine. Go ahead.
Ma'am, if you can just hold on for a minute.
Okay, I will.
Ma'am, excuse my lack of knowledge. I'm rather new to the power sector. I'm really trying to get a hang of understanding of just Rajasthan. So please don't take it as any intentional focus on the northern states. There's no such intention in our mind. Please hang around. We definitely appreciate your comments and learnings from all across the country, especially specifically to the south. I very well understand your feelings, where you're coming from, and the disparity between the north and south. Yes, I do understand, but I request you to please hang around and participate and share your thoughts with us.
Okay, no, Simran.
I do apologize for my naivety. If we can move ahead, sir, Dr. Anoop. Thank you, ma'am. Host,
thank you. I am unmuted now. I got it. Yeah, thanks. A couple of points, I think. As far as technology adoption is concerned, specifically, say, if you look at smart meters, so you look at the transformation in the sector since the reform process began. So the initial focus in the technology context was that we wanted to upgrade the transformers because they burn out easily because the consumers have not really reported their connected load properly. And then the focus shifted towards bringing in electronic meters. So by the time the whole country had electronic meters, we have also started talking about now smart meters or smart prepaid meters. Well, everything seems to be in order in some sense. The only thing is that it's the money which the DISCOM has to bring on the table, and that money is to be recovered from the consumers, and which is possible also. The only difference is that how do we really bring the benefits for the consumers as well as for the utilities. As Dr. Das mentioned, that they realize that most of the theft used to take in the commercial and industrial segment. So introduced, AMI meters there. Now, if you really want to have a smart meter all across the country, across all kinds of consumers, it's well and done, you can do it. But the next question is, what do we do with that kind of data? I mean, do we have capabilities at the DISCOM level that they know that if they are just going to use it to say, okay, I know his bill is correct or not. If they're not going to use it for any other purpose, for example, in design of TOD meters, or at least to understand that how they can really incentivize people or implement a demand response program, or maybe perhaps bring in certain kind of incentives for setting up the storage with these rooftop solar. So all those have to come only when you really analyze the role of the technology in bringing value to the consumers as well as to distribution utilities, right? And just one quick comment. I think Dr. Das mentioned something about whether the consumers and the employees were part of the discussions or not. Yes, I very well know they were part of the discussions in Delhi, but they were part of the discussion primarily because there was a design of a special voluntary retirement scheme. That was the kind of a bargain chip which was given to them so that at least they are on board. But in the rest of the country, something like that is not implemented. Why? Because it still remains the publicly owned utilities. So we still haven't been talking to the DISCOM officials and telling them, or even at the lineman level, we have never been able to sell the idea to him that why we wanted the reform. He said, "Upar se order aaya, ye karna hai," right? That's why I think in the earlier study, which was the presentation made, they said even some of the employees don't even know there is something called ombudsman. So there is somewhere an information gap. We never had confidence of our own system. Yeah.
Thank you. Dr. Geeta.
Yeah, the point that I would again like to intervene here is on the question of the data and how the data is made use. So Anoop, you're saying is right, but all the data has been used. And it is the ERC which collects the data and knows each consumer which level what, how much the load is before the tariff is designed. If it is not done by the other ERCs, then whose fault is it? You see that data is not something that's thrown off. The idea of a smart meter is that there's data. I remember 2000 doing it. If it is not being done in 2020, then there's something really wrong. I can teach people how to do a cost to serve model. I can show them how the data is used. I can show them how the levels come in. And then to say it's not being done, Anoop, there's got to be more questioning of the political system. And what is it that's happening to the ERCs? Why are they not doing it? And how is it that we did it then? See, this is a very major question because design of tariffs is based on data and smart metering would help. I mean, it's something that every economist knows. It cannot be touted 20 years later as something new.
Thank you, Dr. Geeta. Exactly the questions that we are trying to rally. We are talking about new technologies. We are talking about a spate of reforms where the fundamental functions are lacking, right? And somebody needs to question that on behalf of consumers, and consumers perhaps often need to come forward themselves, right? Moving forward, I'll bring up another news reform that is being planned, which is direct benefit transfers. Again, intervention which is bringing a lot of anxiety amongst the consumers, especially the farmers, right? Carrying costs of subsidies obviously has been a burden across many states to many discoms, and as to their AR requirements. It seems like a very good intervention for the cash-starved discoms. So Rahul, if you want to jump in, given your research in the space, what are the possible pitfalls or failure points for DBT from a system failure? What it would mean for the consumers, and what it would mean for the frontline employees of the distribution companies. Over to you, Rahul.
Thank you, Simran. So the first and foremost question is this just an incremental tweak of who's paying, or is there an expectation of greater shifts in the equilibrium? By that, let me step back and remind folks that around 1/7 of the revenues of discoms in 2019 came from subsidies. So that's 1.1 lakh crore rupees. It was predominantly for agriculture and residential. And in addition to this, you have cross subsidies. So now, is it that we're just saying that instead of the state governments paying the discom, they'll just pay the consumer and nothing else shifts? So that's problematic right there. Second, discoms don't get paid on time or as promised. That's another major issue. You flagged this issue of cash trap, where these data are pre-COVID. So in the chat, I've just shared a link to a detailed paper which goes into this larger issue on the subsidies and the finances. Now, the biggest question, I'm going to hold off on practical technicalities of this, which are very, very trivial in how do we get there even to a dream state. But even before that, the biggest question is, if the governments aren't paying, state governments, paying the discoms on time, what happens if they don't pay the consumer on time? Because now the consumer is obligated to pay the discom. Can the consumer turn around and sort of say, oh my gosh, I didn't get the DBT transfer. Sorry, I'll only pay the balance. So A, how does that shift? Or is the discom empowered politically to disconnect said consumer? As long as you've got this one fundamental problem, a counter view is, are you just better off leaving this in the hands of the discom? Now, obviously, you don't necessarily want that. And this is where that feedback loop I referred to earlier is critical. The reason you do want full tariffs to be paid onto the consumer is they have an incentive to save energy. If energy looks cheap or free to them, they have no incentive to save energy. So that is why you do want to be closing this loop, but it's not so easy to close. So these are some of the highest level points. There's a lot more detail, practical. Are you linking it to Aadhaar? Does everyone have Aadhaar? What do you do if the how bijli connection and the consumption are in different names. This happens with landowners versus tenants. This happens with farming, where pump sets are, you have contract farming, laborers, etc. So there's a lot of practical challenges as well, but the fundamentals are also a concern.
Right. Thank you, Rahul. Dr. Anoop, Dr. Geeta, any inputs from your point you want to pitch in here?
I think it's an interesting discussion. And there's a lot that we have to learn from each other. And you have put it across very beautifully. Consumers are very important. And it's very important to understand some states have done it well. They've had different approaches. And as you said, as I think Arvind said, one shoe doesn't fit at all. Thank you, Simran. It was a very good discussion. And I just, Anoop, you don't mind if I got a little angry, but I think I can take that liberty with you. And Rahul was very good. But you see, all of you must realize you have to work in a commission to know. And that is the experience none of you have. It is that when you realize and when you're trying to work out and going to balance between your independence and keeping the state governments happy. And also remember, you have the Finance Commission, which gets after you. What do you do? So it's not just electricity, it's the total financial resources, some of which Rahul touched upon. So I think that's a good discussion. Thank you so much. Nice.
So ma'am, I'll still like to pull you in for the next question.
Yeah, so Dr. Gouri, I think you can stay back. I mean, we of course wants to hear from you. Why not?
Yeah, no, especially given you since you mentioned the experience of working in a regulatory commission, ma'am. I mean, tariff rationalization is increasingly, taking center stage, right? Rajasthan, I'll say, has not necessarily done a good job with it. There's a perspective of what DERC has done. Definitely, if you can also, bring in your days working, bringing your experience working with APRC on how the state or the commission can approach this problem of tariff rationalization, especially given the increasing realization at the government level to reduce the subsidy burden, or the dire need for the same at least.
It's an extremely difficult question you have put. It's very, very difficult. I also looked at some of the suggestions that Raja had sent, Raja and I have been good friends and one thinks about it. And what do you do with trying to allow for regulatory commissions to be independent? Simran, you can be only as independent as the government lets you be, whoever is the government, whether it's the state government or whether the central government. And that is why I said in the beginning that this Amendment 2020 is going towards more centralization of governance, because the Electricity Regulatory Commission, they're making 3 into 4, which means there's no veto vote. 3 into 4 is never what a commission should have. You should have 3, 5, 7. These are very small little technical details. Second thing is, do you need people with technical know-how? We need engineers. But what you need is, none of the universities have good courses on IO, on industrial organization, and and how you look at regulation and regulatory economics. We should design a course for that. And that is where what Raja was saying is right, design a course. Third thing is, we're moving towards markets. The Electricity Regulatory Commission should co-opt with the Competition Commission, because we're now talking in terms of wholesale markets, creating more smaller regional markets and the regional load centers. It's not just a technical thing about, the timing and when you're going to release it, what are the outages. And all said and done, in a country like India, electricity is very important. I think you have to understand that there is something known as universal provision of the good, which is not there in the Electricity Act, and some minimum amount has to be provided. And we have to go, it is better to go in with a certain amount of subsidization of the electricity sector, because it is so critical for economic growth. And at this stage, I think the debate takes on, it's still not, it's maturing, but not enough. And whether we should go into full markets, again, has to be discussed.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much for your inputs. Rahul, would you like to add something? You eloquently talk about trade-offs.
So, I mean, it is a larger challenge, and I think we always need to come back to see the changes that are inevitable. Geeta talked about markets. We should not underestimate the technological shifts that are upon this sector. And they go hand in hand because you've already got open access for bulk consumers. So one set of consumers is already got one instrument upon them to exit whatever messes they dislike. The other side, technology like rooftop solar, once storage technologies become cheap enough, then more and more people are going to say thank you, bye bye. Or they're going to now, with the electricity amendments, it's going to become easier to have third party transactions and sales. And so edge based transactions will also grow. So in all of this, we have to think about what are the stakeholder needs, and utilities and regulators both really do play a balancing act. But instead of trying to the instrument that I believe in is the opposite of socialization. Socialization is, to me, a liquidity fix. If you've got something that doesn't add up, it's unaffordable or too much or pluses and minuses. Instead of socializing, we should make it more explicit where the differences are sharpened, and then you find new instruments for which to pay for these offsets, the pluses and minuses. And I think that will then really encourage energy efficiency and consumer participation. I'm always reminded of this famous quote. Willie Sutton, a bank robber, was asked, why do you rob banks? Oh, that's where the money is. And we seem to forget that the money in this system is, or at least should be, coming out of consumers. And this is the really fundamental issue. From this paper, which I provided a link to, the cost of power purchase alone by discoms in 1819 all India was about 5.6 lakh crore. And yet the revenue from operations was 5 lakh crore only. So a lot more is coming from other stakeholders. Consumers aren't even internally vested. And now we have differentiations. Notice I didn't use the word distortions. Differentiations between types of consumers. We need to do a better job of that, because otherwise you're going to lose the cream. You've got this larger problem of C&I, commercial and industrial consumers, who have been overpaying a lot. If you actually complied with the law says they cannot overpay more than 20% compared to the cost, the average cost of supply. Yet they overpay more than that in the majority of states. If either the regulators do cap them at 20%, or they start to say more and more, bye-bye, I'm leaving thanks to this third-party sale, group captive, which Andhra and Karnataka pioneered, actually. There's so many mechanisms that are at foot. Change is inevitable. I think we need to be more proactive to the types of change we're going to seek. Otherwise, we're going to be bystanders to more disruptive change instead.
Thank you, Rahul. Anoop, you'd like to pitch in?
Well, frankly speaking, I lost track of the original question where we started all of this debate.
Okay. As we move into the final stage of the discussion, I'll request audiences to share their questions either via chat or one of the hosts. My one final set of questions to all the panelists, and Dr. Das, if you are also around, I understand you had to move. With everything that's happening, on whom, and Anshu, Pradeep talk about the very top-down approach to begin with whom does the onus of consumer awareness lie? Right? Are we going to witness a transformation with consumers or without consumers? Is there a scenario where the actors in power sector are going to acknowledge electricity consumers? I understand we have discussed a lot of these. Geeta ma'am has already voiced some of the inputs, or Rahul has done so same. Any final thoughts on this, final set of questions?
Anoop, you want me to respond, please? Hello.
Please, sir, go ahead. You have the stage.
So what you said is, you're talking about the role of the consumer. The consumer will always be, the role of the consumer is only going to increase. So it is going to increase because, as I mentioned, the understanding of the consumer is a little different from what used to be few years back. Today, what happens is, the consumer does not learn from only the experience. The customer has exposure to so many things around us. The media plays a very big role. The understanding of what happens around the world plays a very big role. So the consumer matures, and as what it does is, the electricity is a constant flow which goes to the consumer. The technology is changing. The requirement of the customer is changing. The usage of electricity, what used to be a percentage of what it used to be for, say, earlier is much high now. So the automation has increased, the same mechanization has increased. So what is happening is the consumer is participating more, and it is going to play a very larger role. And having said that, the important point, the technology participation, the one way to address the challenge of the Indian companies to the financial is to participate more in technology platforms. For instance, get customers to participate in storage solutions, get participants to come and get them to participate in putting up some of the energy-related services like electric vehicle charging infrastructure, etc. So what you do is you shift the capital, what you do from the
We have lost his.
Yeah.
Yes. Dr. Das, are you around? He was traveling, so maybe we've lost him. Anoop, you want to jump in?
Yeah, I think in the context of consumer awareness, I just want to, contrast with the, say, the telecom sector. Right? So the ease of access of information, or even to some extent, I will say partial or misinformation, in the case of telecom sector is very much dependent on whom. It's the guy at the corner of the street who tells you kaun sa top up karana hai, right? Ye wala kara lo. Now what happens is, in the electricity sector, this set of even information, we have made it extremely difficult for the consumer to obtain. Right? And I recall about 20 years ago, I once met one of these private licensees who had obtained a license in one of the areas, and he said, my first focus is on really ensuring that galla mere kabje mein ho. And you understand galla means, he says, it's the metering, billing, and collection that should be lying in my domain. All I will never going to really outsource it to anybody. Right? That was the idea at that point of time. And when I looked at the presentation earlier, it's very surprisingly that most of the complaints are actually arising out of the metering and billing, isn't it?
Yep.
So this is the place. And when Rahul mentioned that the consumers are not paying for it, and one of the possible reasons is consumers are not interested in paying because you have made it so difficult for them to pay. It's only in the last few years, especially in the, even I will say in Kesco in Kanpur, now have a web portal and now you can pay things online, especially after COVID, they have been promoting it. But prior to that, we have actually, made people a little bit allergic to this. As soon as you hear something, electricity company ka aaya hai, to log idhar-udhar bhagne lag jate hain. They are not interested in to deal with this kind of a person. So that friendliness had got disappeared somewhere in the system. The regulator is giving money, as it was said earlier, some amount of money for consumer awareness. But I think here what happens is a little bit of complacency on the part of consumers also. So in the presentation, I realized something very interesting. I mean, I'm sure if you look at the electricity quality data in Rajasthan, the consumer will definitely have complaints about quality of electricity supply. So there were 3 points, I could just measure them up, and their accumulated percentage was much less as compared to the billing and metering thing, which means that people are resigned to their fate to some extent. Aisa hi quality aata hai, chalta hai. But then when it comes to metering and billing, they still have a big complaint about it. So the number of complaints about quality of supply were actually less than the number of complaints for metering and billing. So if you do that ABC analysis, I'm sure these utilities at least should be putting their effort on improving this particular 2-3 top priority areas as we go along. And of course, like Dr. Das mentioned, and intervention of technology is something which is useful. And some of the things are cheaper. You have apps now available virtually for everything.
Yes, we do in Rajasthan also, but still a big question mark on the fundamentals. Dr. Gauri.
Yeah, the big question is who is actually sitting on the other side of the app.
Rahul wants to come in now. Do you want to come in now, Rahul?
Thank you. Just an observation. I think we use the word consumer too loosely. It's
Yes.
actually a range of consumers with different needs, challenges, expectations, and our instruments, our policies, and regulations often bundle them. So, for example, even households, we have slabs, we have sort of low end and bigger consumers with tiers or progressive slabs, but rural and urban is just one example of a huge differentiation in when they pay, when they'd like to pay. So many farmers are periodic. And then when we talk about subsidies and DBT, for example, agriculture versus household are two very different beasts, even though they both may be getting some level of subsidies. So how you would tackle them? For farming, you don't even have meters on a lot of the pump sets. So therefore, figuring out how much they consume versus how much they should be given is itself a very complicated task. You can't solve all of these with the same brush. There was a remarkable tweet series done by the UP chairman of the Electricity Commission, I think about a month ago, where he essentially went on. This was, I mean, quite honestly, in reaction to the privatization push that's been ongoing in some places. And he just went on a tear saying, look, don't blame me when 1 crore consumers have not paid their bills. And so, which 1 crore is it is a tricky question. You can't just say all consumers are equal either. So until we get to more of these fundamental questions, I think it's too academic, a lot of the solutions that are being discussed thus far. Geeta?
Yeah.
Sorry, I got disconnected in between. I'm not sure whether I could make my point.
Dr. Das, just give us a few minutes. Dr.
Sure,
Gouri is
sure.
coming
No
in,
problem.
and
Yes,
maybe then you can go ahead.
Actually, Rahul, right in the beginning, I said that the consumer has to be differentiated in the electricity sector. We cannot take the consumer as you do normally in terms of buying goods and selling it. And the fact that there's a differentiation of consumers and the question of data that is coming into it and the design that takes place in the question of the tariff itself is a major exercise. I do feel proud having been the first one in our group to have done it, and we did it very beautifully. And we take care of all of this, and I'd be only too happy to share it with you. Second thing is a point that I'd like to make is finally, consumer is king. It is consumer sovereignty. And you have to listen to the different groups of consumers. If farmers are saying they don't want to pay for power because they're wanting water, but then it is necessary to be able to relate to them and to be able to explain to them the difference between urban, rural, the difference between farming, and the difference between having transformers on top of your pump sets or in the certain area, which is what Pune and Maharashtra do. So there's a lot that has taken place, and we need to share these experiences, and you have to be able to get into the design, which so much of time went into. Having stated that consumers sovereign and one differentiates among the consumers, I think it is equally important to look at the way markets have come up. And some of the cases, the Competition Commission, we handled it when I was in the commission on consumers and what they were trying to do. And they were from Bombay. They were not allowed open access. This was a fight between the two titans, Tata's and the Reliance. You see, there's so much that has been done on the electricity sector that someday, Rahul, when there is no COVID, I will listen to your theoretical framework and give you my explanation. But I think consumer has to be sovereign. And to your question, Simran, I think everything has to go on that basis. The sovereignty of consumer, define them, redefine them, and make them much more way of handling it. And how it is to be done is not a problem which can be universalized across the whole of India.
Thank you for putting that very, very eloquently. Dr. Das, very quickly, if you're around.
Yeah. I'm there. I don't know whether I've been able to. Just one point. What I would say that if you look at the future of the consumer, what we are expecting is consumers are going to play a very important role. Like we want to get them to participate in storage solution, rooftop solar, electric vehicle charging infrastructure, be part of home automation solution. The whole idea is, we don't want to tell the customer that there is a problem, so we cannot invest. But is it possible to do it together where we customer get a value or a consumer get a value at the same time, and we increase the convenience. So what we are hoping is the future of the customer or the customer of the future is going to be more participative and will not be a mere consumer in terms of buying electricity, but in terms of possibly adding and providing value of technology to the network also. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Das, for articulating that transition from a consumer to a prosumer. We have few questions from the audience. I'll try to take some of them at least. We have Dr. Damodaran asking, so in telecom, there is a concept of USO fund. I think it stands for Universal Service Obligation, so that the subsidy will not hit the operators. Why such a concept cannot be adopted in power sector, so that can such a concept be adopted in power sector so that it will not hit financials of the operators? Dr. Gouri, if you want to probably take up.
We don't have it in the Electricity Act.
So why can't we have it?
We don't have it. I mean, we bring it around in a roundabout manner, but it's not there in a direct manner. Anoop would know also. And,
yeah.
Yep.
So should I go ahead, Simran?
Yes, please.
Yeah. So we have actually sent our inputs to MNRE, I think earlier this year, on one of the documents that they had floated about some of these off-grid schemes they wanted to float through the power sector. And this was the suggestion we had given to them at that point. And we have been giving this suggestion, I think, perhaps multiple times over the last 5 years, that why can't we really come up with this USO fund kind of a scheme, specifically when you want to think of this off-grid solutions.
Yeah.
Because currently it's all becoming like a capital investment, where MNRE gives funds, you put up a technology somewhere, and then nobody's bothered about the technology after the first year of the warranty is over. But if you have a USO fund, you may perhaps want to attach the other service conditions, which were now being planned also. Right. It is feasible. It is feasible, yes.
Right. Thank you. We have Mr. Anantha Ramaiya Raja asking, are there any views on separation of supply and wires, business of the discoms? Something discussed in 2018 amendment, but then dropped in 2020. I see a lot of hands going up.
Yeah.
Please, sir, go ahead.
So let Dr. Gouri start. I think she will put the context, and then I will jump in.
Yeah. The open access, the carriage and content, and all these arguments we've gone through with it. I think I've spoken too much. You take it over, Anoop. I think Rahul will be very good. He has a very good theoretical understanding, which I like.
Yeah, sure. So should I go ahead and give some inputs? Rahul, you want to go ahead first?
Sure.
Because I would like to think I'm more than just theory. I'm quite real world attuned, but please start, Anoop.
No, essentially, it's the idea of carriage and content separation in theory is really good, no doubt about it, right? But when it comes to implementation, I think we have not one, but perhaps you can write a thesis on how many challenges we have. And one of the most significant of them is about how do you apportion T&D losses? Second is, what do you do with this legacy PPAs? So in theory, we can do this. And of course, we need to invest significantly in metering infrastructure. Everybody should have smart meters. So it is something that we need to plan now. And perhaps we'll be able to ultimately do it at some point of time. And in fact, we had suggested in response to the bill, which the proposal it was at least at 2 instances, that why not really bring up a small portion of a particular licensee or even a government licensee where you have significant concentration of consumers, and let this be a kind of an example for us, a test case for us, and let us see how it works. At least we'll be able to learn or unlearn something from there. Because ultimately, at some point, we will be toying with this idea, good or bad. We will be toying with this idea. So why not let's start making some preparations toward that?
So just a few follow-ons. I think you've covered most of the correct points. One is the resistance from states was high. I think that's a practical reason why it moved away in this. But at a design level, the issue of cherry picking was very strong. Provider of last resort, which then became segregation of creamy and non-creamy sorts of customers or geographic coverage. And then there's a larger question I have. Every time I hear people say, oh, we need markets to solve this problem. Well, in the power sector, there's more than one power type of market. You've got capacity versus energy and so many nuances that are very critical for a country like India, because we're a growing economy. Unlike the West, where you're just optimizing your existing, in India, we need to figure out where to put in investments, because that's a very tough thing. Once you build it, you will operate very differently than just choosing where you want to build. But for all these claims that markets will solve problems, I always step back and say, wait, 3/4 of my cost structure for electricity is procurement of power, ballpark. And now you don't have liberalization of fuel markets. So if you don't have fuel competitive and liquid, coal India, and all of these other things, I think it's naive to expect miracles out of market reforms at the consumer side. The only thing you do get is efficiency, which is not to be understated, but you should look to efficiency even in a regulated space or with more private sector participation. There's many other instruments than just saying carriage and content will get you there.
Thank you, Rahul. Dr. Gauri, you want to jump in, please?
I
Please,
just
ma'am,
want
go
to
ahead.
make a point for Rahul. Rahul, there are 2-3 case studies of the Competition Commission, which you should take a look. They'll be very interesting for the points you have raised.
Look forward to, I'll email you. Yeah, we can connect. Yeah,
we can connect later, but they're very important.
But did you disagree with what I was stating?
No, I don't. I agree with you completely.
Okay.
Then how does one handle it?
In fact, just to put a different perspective, that in the context of carriage and content separation. So if you look at it from a broader perspective, do consumers have a choice now? Well, consumers do have a choice as of now. And in fact, there are cases, Dr. Gauri, you may correct me, I recall that some of the consumers in Pondicherry and Puducherry now, they have actually surrendered their electricity connection. Is it correct? Right? I've heard of that. So this means they can actually start. Of course, they are relatively richer consumers who could invest significantly in the battery capacity and all that. But consumers do have a choice, but it's an expensive choice as of now.
Yeah.
But in the long run, do consumers have a choice to run away from an inefficient, irresponsive, non-transparent kind of utility? That's what we don't have as of now.
At the LT level, we don't, unless you're big enough or rich enough. I think the choices there are just like what used to be my mother's menu for food. You always have two choices, take it or leave it.
Don't be nasty. No, but that it's not there in the LT level. And even for the HT level, when they do have these outage charges, because they, you never know when your system may go, the rates are very high. But what?
So, can I come in, Simran?
Yes, Dr. Gauri, are you saying something?
I was having a two perspective in this. One is, of course, we can debate about the maturity of content and carriage, whether it should be coming, how it should be coming. We had this debate for privatization also, and then there was success in privatization, but still things did not move because the reasons were different. So even for carrier and content, we may have some success, or we may have a kind of a the whole idea is to see that how do we reduce the losses in the marketplace, how do we make this entire industry viable. That is the whole intent of trying multiple business models. And for that, I would say that it is important not only to look at only distribution, but also to move to transmission and the generation side. If you look at the balance sheet of Power Grid, they make a clean 30% on their revenue as profit, and which is not there, which is totally different from the balance sheet of what you see in the distribution companies. So the whole idea is, do we need to only look at distribution and try to find solution through a set of people who has been always bleeding through either we can call a system process or political situation or whatever, or can we look at the entire value chain in totality and then find a solution? Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Das. I think the debates and the questions in power sector are endless, but we are nearing the end of the time. I'd like to thank you very much, all the panelists. I'm slightly thankful also for Madam Geeta getting provoked. It brought a completely new, unplanned dimension to the discussion and perhaps a little bit of fun. But I do apologize for any unintended translations. Thank you, everybody. I'll hand over to Aman for the closure formalities. Aman, you're there?
Yeah, I'm audible.
Yes. Thank you.
Thanks, Anna. Thank you, everyone, for this lively discussion. Stemming from what Dr. Gouri said about balancing different interests while working in a regulatory commission, it reminds me of my last class of electricity regulation in a new course of regulatory governance at TES, where after weeks of conceptual lecture, assignments, guest lecture workshops, our professor left us with a food for thought on the board. It read, is regulation essentially an art of voice compromise or means to innovate solutions? So yeah, that latent intent statement is a crucial issue that we are facing across various sectors. However, this discussion has already given us some food for thought on how a just transformation can take place in the Indian power distribution sector. For this, I would like to summarize a few interesting points that came out of this discussion. The first point was of consumer empowerment. While with the increasing use of energy, the consumer has become a key player in the power sector. So hence, they should be capacitated and made aware about their right and responsibility. Another crucial point that came out of the discussion was viewing electricity as a public duty rather than a public good. By putting electricity into this bracket, various aspects of regulations and governance comes into play, which can help further the ailing power sector that we have. And again, last but not the least, the role of technological disruption, such as smart meters, which can help in reducing the operational losses of discoms, as well as empower the consumers to efficiently consume the energy. So with this, on behalf of Cuts and Bask, I would like to thank all the esteemed speakers for sharing the valuable opinion on today's topic. I would also like to thank Shakti Sustainable Energy Foundation for consistently supporting us throughout the length of this project. And finally, a big thank you to the participants for taking out their time and being part of the webinar. Apologies if we could not take up your questions. We had plethora of questions targeted at the speakers, but owing to the paucity of the time, we could not take all the questions. So, but do reach out to us if you have any other queries. Once again, thank you very much. It's been a great pleasure. Yeah, so with this, we can end our webinar.